Hi everyone, my name is Robin Brown. I'm a waste educator from Western Australia. I go out to schools and to community groups and I show people how they can reduce their waste. I'm also a passionate organic gardener and I do a lot of videos with regards to that, and today I'm going to show you how to make a very simple wicking bed. And we've got, the first thing that you have to get is a water holding container. It can be as simple as this one, which is a polystyrene box, obtainable for free from supermarkets. These are used in Western Australia for carting leafy greens on ice to supermarkets or oysters. But they are perfect for a beginner to experiment with, because this is like all elements of gardening, you have to practice. And there's no point in having one big fancy wicking bed if you don't know the principle, and the principle is very easy. You are trying to create a water reservoir that plants can draw from at will, and so suffer from less shock, which is pretty important. And most important, you're saving water, it won't evaporate, and that's really important in a country like Australia. So how to go about this? We've got our container. The first thing we need to do, other than the fact that we found a waterproof one, is we've now got to work out what materials we can put in the bottom that will hold the water, will keep the reservoir and stop the shade cloth from falling and collapsing in on it. Now there's a few materials, and if you go on the internet you'll probably find the most common one is blue metal or gravel or rocks, like this one. It's very heavy, so if you were trying to get something that's light and transportable, and as I'm doing in this foam box, then that's defeating the purpose. Another alternative you can use, which is a waste item obviously, are plastic milk bottles or plastic water bottles. You can leave the lid on. I also put water in that helps weigh them down so that they're not floating around on top of the water. Obviously once your shade cloth's on there in the soil they'll push down, but when you're first making it it's a little difficult. So that's an option, but what I'm using today are empty seedling trays. Here's one of the large trays that I actually cut. I had a big one of these and we cut the end off, and that's going to fit down inside my box, along with all those little individual seedling trays. And I'm also going to need a piece of PVC piping in a moment, which is going to be what we use for watering and filling up my reservoir. So here's my piece of PVC pipe, which I'm going to use. It has a V end in it. You can get fancy editions of these. You can put a fitting on the end and an elbow and make it come out the length of the pot with holes in. It's not necessary. I've used this technique before. As long as you've got a reservoir that's about a third the thickness of your container, just having those V's is all you need. You can use other piping. This is a piece of waste pipe left over from a broken vacuum hose from our swimming pool. That's fine. You could use a piece of agricultural black slotted drain. That's also fine. And you continue packing these bits and pieces of your waste items or your found items in around this pot, this tube, until it's self-supporting. And then the next stage is to get a material which is going to be the barrier between the soil and your water. Now again, on the internet they'll tell you more than likely to use geotex. It's a landscaping material which is used to stabilise steep banks, but it's quite expensive to buy, and I'm always looking for things that are waste or are free, that are going to be thrown out. This was a piece of shade cloth somebody gave to me, and you need to calculate the width of your pipe because you're going to have to thread this through. I just made a couple of slits rather than cut a big circle out that's going to fit snugly around my pipe. So before you do it, you would lay your piece of shade cloth over the top and then work out roughly where it's going to be, make your slits with some scissors and cut, and then push it down. So that's all been pre-cut, but that wouldn't take very long to do. We'll push that down into the box. And the idea is to put it down till it's nice and snug and laying on top of those, whatever material you've chosen to use. Don't go out and buy materials, especially for this one, it's a practice one. And there's so much waste out there anyway, it's good to use it. Now I've got chickens that roam around my garden all the time, so I cut my piece of shade cloth a bit bigger so that it hangs down over the edges. I can even wire that down. Because one of the things that the chickens love to do is to peck on the polystyrene foam, and that's not good for them. Fills up their tummy. So at that point, I also need to establish my drain hole. And this is where you get out the drill, or in the instance of a foam box, I'm going to use a screwdriver. But I'm going to get my trusty photographer to come over closer and show you. Because what you've got to do is work out exactly the point where the shade cloth meets the water. And you would put your drill on the inside and drill. This is a little bit too big, so that's why I've used a screwdriver. But you would sit it down on the shade cloth, onto those pots, and drill through, and that's sitting right on the surface of where the pot meets. You might need a couple of those holes. One might not be enough, but again, they've got to be in line. And that way you'll make sure that your pot never floods in winter. Your plants are never soaking and getting mouldy or anything from having too much water in there. So that it's like an escape mechanism for that water. Another little thing, and then you just put your shade cloth back over that, because of course the water's going to leak through the shade cloth. Now, something else you can do, some people, particularly in warm climates, get a little bit sensitive about having water lying around in saucers. If you want to, you could put some mesh over the top of this with a lacquer band on it to stop midges going down in there and breeding. I've never found that to be a problem. I've got a swimming pool which is obviously going to attract more mosquitoes than a tiny little reservoir like that particular one. So we've got that all set up now, ready for putting our soil in. If you're using a harder container, it does take a little bit longer with the drill, and you might have to pierce the container first with a nail or a screwdriver before you actually drill through the hole. But we've gone through quite hard materials before, and even through a fiberglass bath without any problems. All right, so now it's the fun part, and we can start planting up. So I've got some home compost to go in there. Pack that down the bottom so that provides some nice nutrients for our plants. And then in goes the potting mix. You don't need to have really expensive potting mix. A good open one, you don't need any water holding crystals or anything like that in it. I use compost tea, so I don't buy anything that's got fertilisers or anything in it because I add them all up myself. But that's up to you. And to start with, it needs a bit of help to pack that all down. So we pack that in. So now the fun part comes, and it's time to put our seedlings in. A wicking bed's particularly good for growing leafy greens because they can draw on that water whenever and for as long as they like during the day. So that first one that's going in there is my Zuna. And then I've got a oak leaf lettuce, which is going to do the same thing. Needs lots and lots of water. If it's a particularly hot climate, they're still going to need a bit of protection from the sun. So the beauty of using one of these foam boxes is that they're quite light, so you can come in at midday when it's getting really, really hot and carry them into the shade. Make sure that when you plant out some flowers with your veggies, because it provides a attraction for the bees. In this case, I've got some calendulas, and I can also use the orange petals in my salad. I sometimes grow alyssum in there. The bees particularly like alyssum. Got a Italian parsley that's going to go in the salads too. They are very easy to grow by seed, and they don't bolt. They last a long, long time, and reseed prolifically. So that's a great thing about growing your own seeds, and of course it's much cheaper. We've got a red mustard to go in, which adds a bit of spice to your greenly leafy salad. And then last of all, I've got some warrigal greens, which, although they're not really eaten in a salad, but you are supposed to give them a slight blanching because they have got a little bit of oxalic acid. But that's really just plunging in the hot water and taking out again. They're easy to grow. They reseed in my garden all the time. They're actually a native to New Zealand and Australia. Good to have, and we use them all the time. And that's as simple as that is, as anything. Now, what we've got to do now, I tend to, seedlings tend to get a bit of transplant shock, and seaweed helps with that. So I buy concentrated seaweed and give them a little dousing of that. So they've got some on the leaves firstly, and a little bit in the soil, and then comes the fun part. We are going to actually fill the reservoir up and make sure that it is overflowing. So we'll be able to see that because we've got our little holes in. I'll just keep filling up that reservoir. Now it takes about 3 to 4 days of watering from the top on the soil with your watering can for the soil to pack down, and then it takes about a week for the roots in those plants to get to go exploring and looking for the water. So you'll need at least a week of watering traditionally. And I'm just going to put some more of this seaweed in here. And we should see soon that coming out through our hole. There we go. And now it's just starting to weep out. And that's when you know that your wicking bed is full, and it means that the shade cloth has now compacted down against your material on your reservoir, which in my case was the little seedling containers, and it should be topped up all the time. You can also, if you've got reticulation, automatic reticulation, which I have at my property, you can use tubing and connect that up to your system, and that just comes on every time the irrigation goes on, so that the water will flow through all the time, and you can just keep an eye on it. And that's pretty easy. And now you can adapt this system to very fancy wicking beds. People can use huge wicking beds, and you use pond liners, or you can put them in a pot, you can put them in an old bath. The sky's the limit. So thanks very much for joining me today, and make sure you check out my Facebook site and my website for more videos. Waste is my resource. Thank you.